following is an unusual reincarnation story where instead of a child informing its parents that they had once lived a past life, a spirit communicated with a doctor and his wife telling them that it would be reincarnated with one of their relatives. The following story took place in France in 1924 and was about a doctor and his wife who decided to experiment with an Ouija board and the unusual consequences that followed. At first, Dr. Maurice Delaray and his wife Jeanne began to receive what they believed to be credible messages from the spirit world. Jean Delaray was the main participant of the board, and her husband would often observe his wife having conversations with spiritual beings on various topics. She appeared to be using the Ouija board as a type of medium, where spirit beings would take over her hands and communicate with her. One day when Jean was operating the board, the name Felix Fresno was spelled out. Dr. Delaray looked at the name and said he had never met anyone in his life with that name. However, his wife remembered that a servant by that name had worked for her father for 10 years in the town of Renage in southeastern France, and Felix had died about 20 years ago in 1904. They then asked the Ouija board whether they were ever employed by the Beaulieu family, which was his wife's previous surname, in the town of Renage. The board said yes, they were employed by a family of that name. Jeanne told her husband that she remembered that Felix Fresno had an abnormal right ear that stuck out towards the front of his face. As Jeanne continued with the board sessions, she found that Felix came through more often than other spirits, and his communication skills began to improve, and he got better with every encounter with her. It was during his 6th session that he imparted a very intriguing message. In May 1924, the doctor and his wife were having a session on the Ouija board when Felix informed the couple they would shortly be reincarnating with a member of their family. The Delarays had quite a large family who was spread throughout the world, so in order to find out which family member he would become a part of, he needed to be much more specific. Felix Fresno told them that the family he would shortly become a part of presently resided in Les Perrons in southern France. It just so happened that the Delarays did have some relatives living in Les Perrons with the surname Albrecht, and was this the family that he was referring to? Felix then spelled out yes, and was even able to spell out their first names, their exact ages, and that they also had 2 daughters. He was correct on all accounts. They then asked Felix whether they could tell him the exact date he would be born, and he replied, the morning of September the 24th, 1924. After all that Felix had told them, the Delarays were still a bit skeptical and said to Felix, how can we believe that the baby would actually be you? You might be guessing. Felix replied that you will know it's me because Jean will observe that I'll have an unusual ear. Because the Delarays had no recent contact with the Albrecht family, they had no idea whether the woman was pregnant, and if a baby was to be born on the 24th of September, she would presently have to be 4 or 5 months pregnant. Instead of contacting the family, they decided to wait until shortly after the 24th of September to seek confirmation. On September the 24th, 1924, the Albrecht family rang all of their close relatives, including the Delarays, to announce the birth of their newly born son, who they named Christophe. However, the doctor and his wife Jeanne did not approach the Albrecht family and tell them that they knew months before that they would give birth to a baby boy, who was revealed in an Ouija board, because they were staunch Roman Catholics who did not believe in reincarnation. They had no intention of challenging their religious convictions. 3 months after the birth of their son Christophe Albrecht, or rather the rebirth of Felix Fresno, the Delarays were invited to a family reunion at their home in Les Perrons. When they arrived at the house, the Albrecht family told them that the baby was upset and crying, possibly because of the large number of people who'd been fussing around him. The Delarays were then led into the baby's room, and as soon as Jean Delaray approached the crib, the baby started smiling and immediately stopped crying. He then stretched out his arm to Jean to be picked up, which she then took him in her arms. He became transformed from a crying baby to a happy baby. After observing her new baby's actions, the mother said to Jean, "Look at that. One might have thought that we already knew you." The Delarays noticed that the baby had bandages on his head and asked whether he'd hurt himself. The mother replied, "Oh, it's nothing. The poor thing must have been in a bad position when he was inside her womb and was born with his right ear sticking out. She said the doctor advised them that by covering the ear, it would develop normally, and in a few months, nobody would notice it. So it appears that Felix Fresno had planned his future incarnation and chose his parents, and even knew the exact date and place that he would be born. He even knew that he would be born with a deformed ear, as it had in his previous life. Although this case took place in 1924, the family did not wish to announce their proof of reincarnation because it conflicted with the Roman Catholic beliefs. It appears that the Delares did eventually disclose the strange Ouija board prediction to the Outbreak family, who also wanted it kept quiet because it did indeed conflict with their Catholic beliefs. The incident was eventually published in 1948, where the famous expert in reincarnation, Professor Ian Stevenson, published the story in his case notes, but had to change the name of all the people involved and give them pseudonyms. For most people, reincarnation is a confusing concept, with the rebirth of a soul in another body. And over the years, Weird World has covered many amazing reincarnation stories, leaving no doubt that some people have lived many lives. Most of the stories that people have told about living a past life have been backed up by written records, photos, and family members. The following story appears to be more proof that a human soul can live more than one life. Bruce Kelly was born on January the 19th, 1952, and grew up in Glendora, California. Throughout his life, Bruce suffered from 3 overpowering phobias: a fear of flying, a fear of enclosed spaces, and a fear of water, and did not understand why he had these fears. For many years, Bruce tried several different treatments for his anxieties and sought the help of several doctors to help with his crippling phobias, but nothing worked and were unable to help him with his fears. In desperation, in November 1987, he went to a hypnotherapist by the name of Rick Brown, who specialised in the then unusual practice of past life regression. Kelly told Dr. Brown that whenever he was in an aeroplane, he was filled with terror the moment the cabin doors were closed. He said he was terrified of water and could only shower if his back was to the spray and could not climb into a bathtub. If he did try and immerse himself in the water, he would become dizzy and nauseous. He was also troubled by stabbing pains in his stomach and chest that could not be explained by doctors. Dr. Brown said that 99% of the people who come to him did not go into past lives, and that only about 1% of people have spontaneous regressions when working with phobias. When initially treating Bruce, he found he did have a spontaneous regression to a past life. During his session, Bruce had visions of being in a submarine. He said that he was in his cabin, as it had an injury and was confined to his bunk with 2 broken ribs. Whilst lying in his bunk, there was a large explosion that initially shook the submarine. But then 2 days later, there was a second explosion causing large amounts of water to fill the cabin. He said that he and another sailor had attempted to get out of the cabin, but the water came rushing in and they drowned whilst trying to escape. Bruce felt that the visions were so vivid that it felt as if they were actually happening to him in real time. Under hypnosis, Dr. Brown then asked him questions about himself, where he claimed that his name was James Edward Johnston and that he was an American Navy submariner. He then went further, claiming that he was aboard the USS Shark during World War II, and they were underwater off of Borneo in Southeast Asia, near an island called Celebes. He said that he had drowned after the Japanese Navy had dropped 2 depth charges onto the submarine. Kelly also claimed that the sailor that was trapped and subsequently drowned with him was named Walter Pilgrim. He claimed that they both died at 11:34 p.m. on February the 11th, 1942. Bruce Kelly was a born-again Christian, and after his first session, he could not accept the concept of reincarnation, but was nevertheless curious and continued with the sessions. Bruce Kelly was so fascinated after his first session with the hypnotist that the following day he went to the library to research the sailor he called Johnston and the USS Shark that he claimed to have lost his life in. In an amazing discovery, he found the USS Shark was the first submarine lost during the war and that it had disappeared near an island called Celebes. He also checked the crew roster. and found the name of the sailor he claimed to have been, whose full name was James Edward Johnston. And he also found the other sailor who perished with him, Walter Pilgrim. Records showed that the USS Shark was lost on February 11th, 1942. Everything that Bruce Kelly had told the hypnotherapist was true in every detail. Dr. Brown also spent many hours searching in libraries, the US Navy Historical Center, and operational archives, and the military reference and service branches of the National Archives in Washington, D.C. Unfortunately, the precise whereabouts of Johnston when he drowned could not be confirmed, as the submarine was never salvaged, and there were many submarines that sank and were never recovered, and there would have been many sailors that suffered the same terrifying fate as Johnston and his crew. Over the following 6 months, Kelly saw Dr. Rick Brown once a week, and during the sessions he was able to get more information about the life of James Edward Johnston. Under hypnosis, they were able to go further back into Johnston's life. They found that Johnston was born in Jacksonville, Alabama on February 1st, 1921, and was raised by his unwed mother in a one-rented bedroom of a company-owned house in the Profile Cotton Mill village. In one particular vision, he is 12 years of age, and it is March 1936, and his young mother is dying in bed at home, and his young cousin Elizabeth is standing next to him. He also has insights into certain behaviours of the young James Johnston, claiming that he would eat the end piece of a loaf of bread and would often be chastised for it. Johnston was a young man during the Great Depression, where due to lack of work, he was enrolled in a government work program called Civilian Conservation Corps. In 1938, when he was 17, he met his first girlfriend, whose name was Molly Lassiter, and had a vision of them standing on a bridge. He wanted her to run away with him, but she was afraid that if her father found them, he would hurt Johnston. Apparently, they never saw each other again. Both the hypnotist and Bruce did further research into the last session, where Bruce claimed he'd been involved in the Civilian Conservation Corps and found that Johnston had indeed participated in the CCC, as it was known, from 1938 to 1939, and was stationed in Tool Lake, near the California and Oregon border, and Scottsboro and Guntersville in Alabama, proving that his memories were accurate, and his birth certificate confirmed that Johnston was indeed born in February 1921. Further records showed that Johnston had enlisted in the Navy in 1940 and was stationed aboard the USS Stark, when the Navy records showed that he was born in Jacksonville, Alabama. Through Johnston's accurate descriptions, Dr. Brown was able to get more historical accuracies of the number of 4 other US subs close by and the base of operations, as well as the initial mission of USS Shark, along with the full names of other crewmen. After what Bruce Kelly had disclosed what being hypnotically regressed, and the names and places being found to be accurate after checking historical records, Dr. Brown was certain that Bruce Kelly is the reincarnation of James Edward Johnston, and to further verify all of the facts, both Dr. Brown and Bruce Kelly decided to visit Jacksonville on April 17th, 1993. They visited the home where Johnston had lived with his mother in the 1920s and 30s, where Bruce immediately experienced a strong reaction. They first moved to the side of the house when Bruce could see a bedroom, and he knew that that was his bedroom in his previous life. After seeing the house, strong emotional feelings started hitting him. Bruce remembered that he used to have to come in from the back street and came through the back door and the back porch. He remembered feeling like a second-class citizen, as they were poor and his mother was unmarried. They later met up with several of Johnston's friends and relatives, where there was one particular cousin called Elizabeth or Betty Watson, and she confirmed that as a young girl she stood next to him as his mother was dying, and also confirmed they would always eat the crust off of the ends of the bread, and was not allowed to enter the house through the front door and had to use the back door. Bruce then visited the Jacksonville Cemetery, where a memorial stone had been erected in honour of James Edward Johnston. No one knows the details of Johnston's death, but Bruce Kelly's visions during his hypnotic regression were able to fill in the missing details of how he met his fate. Bruce was also trying to locate Johnston's girlfriend, Molly Lassiter, and further verify his claims. According to Bruce Kelly, she lived near the California-Oregon border in 1938. and in 1993, at the time he was having his regressive hypnotherapy, she would have been in her 70s. It is not known whether he was able to contact her, as it would have been his final confirmation that he had lived a previous life as James Edward Johnston. After many sessions with Dr. Rick Brown, the treatment proved to be therapeutic, where his fears of closed spaces and water faded away, and he no longer experienced the pains in his torso, which had apparently been caused by his past life rib injuries. Georgia Rudolph was born on the 15th of October 1948 in Medina County, Ohio. All of her life, she had recurring dreams of being a young girl who was dressed from the turn of the 20th century. In her dreams, Georgia would describe many sensations, such as being very cold and could smell horses and leather. She could feel herself climbing onto a carriage and could hear the sounds of horses' hooves as the carriage moved along the road. Georgia claims that the dreams began when she was about 5 years of age and had no idea what initially triggered them. The moment she started to have the dreams, there was not a month that went by where she would either have the dreams or would be drawing pictures of the girl in the dreams. What frustrated her most was that she knew exactly what the girl looked like, but every time she attempted to draw what she looked like, she could not get the exact likeness, and in frustration, she would screw up the paper and start again and again. Usually when a young child had visions and dreams of a past life, the dreams become less frequent as they get older. But in Georgia's case, as she got older, the dreams and visions only got stronger. Her dreams were always the same, as a girl dressed in old-fashioned clothing, and there were never any cars or any modern technology, but always from the same period of time, as if she was living in the late 19th or early 20th century. She would also dream of paddle steamers, which she'd never ever seen in her current life or in a picture. Georgia said that the recurring dreams and images were nothing like a childhood memory, but felt different. She said it was like taking a picture from her mind and then projecting it onto a screen, which would replay over and over again. Another recurrent image was that of a river and a young man dressed in a brown suit wearing a derby hat. Sometimes the man was by himself, while other times he was with the girl, along with images of a horse-drawn carriage on a cold winter night. Because the images continued to haunt her, she decided to seek help and contacted a clinical psychologist by the name of Douglas Smith. When Georgia first contacted Douglas Smith, he initially believed she was suffering from childhood trauma that would keep recurring, or that she was suffering from multiple personalities in which she imagined herself to be another person. The psychologist said that the possibility that Georgia had reincarnated had never entered his mind. In 1984, when Georgia was in her 30s, he decided to use regressive hypnosis on her, which enabled her to go back in time. During the first session, he addressed her as Georgia, but while in a hypnotic state, Georgia replied, "I don't know who you're talking to." The psychologist then said, "Well, if this isn't Georgia, then who is it?" And her reply was, "My name is Sandra Jean Jenkins." She said that she was born in 1895 and had a boyfriend. She said she had brown hair and brown eyes. At this stage, the psychologist was amazed by Georgia's vivid memory of the young woman, and saw Georgia as a down-to-earth person who surprised him about the amount of detail, including the emotive state of the young woman called Sandra Jean Jenkins. After being regressed, Georgia was now able to put a name to the face she continued to draw throughout her childhood, along with the young woman's memories and dreams. In later sessions, Georgia was able to give more detail of her visions, where she could clearly see Sandra Jean standing on a paddle steamer with a young man wearing the derby hat. His name was Tommy Hicks, and they were sweethearts who were about to be married. Under hypnosis, there appeared to be no doubt that Georgia was describing a previous life that she had lived that now terrified her, as it went against her religious beliefs and everything that she had been taught. Psychologists had no doubt that Georgia's experiences were real, about what she'd experienced in her past life, and could not have faked anything. In further sessions, Georgia was constantly drawn to the town of Marietta, Ohio. So in 1985, Georgia decided to visit the town in the hope of finding further proof of her childhood dreams that had haunted her. She also wanted further confirmation that she had lived a previous life and that the dreams were not childhood fantasy. On arriving, Georgia met a reporter by the name of Ted Bauer, who had lived in the town of Marietta all of his life and had worked for the local newspaper for 32 years. Bauer offered to take Georgia around the town, but instead she said she would show him where to go. After their walk, Ted Bauer was shocked to find out how much knowledge she had about Marietta, and that she knew more than some of the old-timers knew about the town, and considering that Georgia had never been to Marietta in her life. There was one point during Georgia's visit where they stopped in front of an insurance company, and Georgia told them that the building was once an ice cream parlour, and went on to describe what the interior in the parlour looked like. Keep in mind that this was 1985 and the ice cream parlour had closed in 1937. This was 11 years before Georgia was even born in 1948. Ted Bauer checked a description of the interior of the ice cream parlour with the son of the man who had once owned it, and found her description was totally accurate. He could not believe it. Now absolutely convinced that she had lived another life as Sandra Jean Jenkins, she was both frightened and excited, as her walk around the town of Marietta was proof. However, her search into the history of Sandra Jean Jenkins would hit a major snag when she could find no record of the young woman in the town. Georgia decided to take a search further when she visited the small farming town of Newport, Ohio, and once again was familiar with her surroundings. As she drove into Newport, the first building that stood out was a large grey house which sent chills down her spine, as she realised that it was the house that she had lived in. As she stood at the front of the property, she could see the room that was once her bedroom. Throughout Georgia's life, there was one particular dream that stood out from all of the others, which was a young girl standing by herself on the steps of a church. In that dream, she would walk 2 blocks to the cemetery, where she would follow a path to the right. The path curved and twisted before straightening out, where she found herself on the side of a hill that looked down on a grave, which she believed was her grandmother's grave. Unfortunately, in the dream, she was never able to make out the name on the gravestone, as it was at this point that she would wake up. Georgia was able to locate the church and was then able to recreate the dream by walking to the cemetery and following the same direction as her dream. She then stopped at the location where she would have woken from her dream and was finally able to read the name on the gravestone, which read Mary Bevan Green, which she knew was her grandmother. From the gravestone, she was able to trace back to the large grey house that she had dreamt about. The house had been owned by the Green family in the early 1900s. The Green family owned a fleet of paddle steamers on the Ohio River. Under hypnosis, the puzzle finally came together, where a few days before Sandra Jean Jenkins and Tommy Hicks were due to marry in 1914, Hicks was swept overboard in a storm on the Ohio River, and his body was never found. To make matters worse, Sandra Jean found she was pregnant, and to avoid family shame, took her own life by drowning in a lake. Because she had taken her own life, she was not allowed to be buried alongside her family, and was buried in an unmarked grave just a few feet from her grandmother. Under hypnosis, Georgia said that from Sandra Jean's unmarked grave, there was a small statue of an angel with its right arm extending upward. On a visit to the cemetery, she could see the statue of the angel close to where Sandra Jean and her grandmother were buried. Like herself, Georgia could not find any records of Tommy Hicks, but was able to find his parents, Tom and Jenny Hicks, where records showed that in 1906 there was a farm registered to Tom and Jenny Hicks in Newport, Ohio. Georgia was also able to trace the Green family's closest living relatives, who were finally able to give her evidence that Sandra Jean Jenkins had actually existed. They brought out an old family photo that was taken in 1908, and she was able to see a girl in the picture that she had been drawing her entire life. One of the family said that they do not know who the girl in the picture was, but she apparently drowned out the back of the house. In the family photograph, the girl in her dreams appeared to be standing apart from those around her. The photograph showed a list of names where every single person is identified except the girl Georgia recognised as Sandra Jean Jenkins. Unfortunately, Georgia Rudolph passed away on the 12th of February 2013 at the age of 64.